Good evening and welcome to another Stormgate editor showcase video. Today I will be bringing 4 buffing spells. Infernal Vitality, which the caster will channel to try and look for targets that are in combat to buff. Fiery Strength, which will instantly be buffing 4 targets around the caster. Bolster Champion, which needs to be channeled onto the target. And Virulent Plague, which will spread damage over time onto targets. If you want to try the editor yourself, then feel free to jump into the community patch PTR version of the game and try it yourself. Or comment in the comment section for something you want me to try and make. And before we go on to the content, I want to showcase one issue I found that caused me trouble when initially familiarizing myself with the editor. Currently the trigger actions create revealer, which gives vision over the map, will, to my understanding, create an invisible unit, which is eligible for search area effects. And the same is true for the center of the map, for some reason that I have not yet discovered why. I will showcase it with the center of the map here, and these 2 spots, which I know the create revealers are located at, which will be hit when I use a spell that causes particle effects where the effect takes place. Okay, now, here's my spellcaster, and here is the center of the map, and here are the 2 revealers, and here is approximately the range of the spell. Now as I go closer, you can see that I am within range, and for some reason it causes particle effects here. And you can see now the center of map here is hit, and so are these. I'm not sure why, but if you want to try the editor, then just be aware that the create revealer will potentially cause trouble with search area effects, and same with the center of the map. And for the first spell, Infernal Vitality, I will have one spell where the spellcaster will be channeling and actively be trying to look for allies to buff around itself, and it will only drain energy when it finds a target. First thing first, the buff. For the buff visual, I'll be setting it to Rejuvenation. The buff here will be, so long as the unit hasn't buffed, this visual particle effect will be going onto it until the buff is removed. And I will be setting the duration to 10 seconds. And a flag here. Show progress. What this does is that it will give a small bar which will show the remaining duration of the buff, so that I can see how long it will last. And the icon here, Fury attack speed. The icon here will be when you select the unit and it has a buff. This is the icon that will be showcasing the buff. And I will have 3 modifier effects to alter the unit. First thing first, armor scaled additive bonus. This parameter here will give a flat value bonus of armor to its target. In this case, so long as it is buffed, it will have 25 more armor. And for the second parameter, speed percentage bonus. This will increase the unit's movement speed by a percentage, which in this case will be 30. And for the last one, I want the unit to attack faster. This setting here, it will allow me to increase or decrease the attack speed. It can go in negative as well, just as the other values. If I for instance wanted to reduce the armor, I would just set this to negative, and if I wanted to move slower, I could set this to negative as well. And next step, the apply buff. This is needed for if you want to have weapons or spells that will give a buff to it to other units or itself. You will need an apply buff. And next, the button. I'll be setting this to the previously. The button here, it will be when you select the unit in the command card. This is what it will look like. I will have this the same icon as the buff. For the modify unit, this is what will subtract energy from it. See, when I set the effect target to caster, then no matter how it is, when I set this to the set group and search, even if it targets the enemy, this will feed back to the caster and subtract an energy value of 10. And next up, the set grouper. This will be to entity and target, so that when the search radius goes off and tries to find a target, it will go onto the target and not accidentally hit the ground for whatever reason. And I will have 2 effects. Now when the search radius goes off, it will launch both the apply buff and modify unit, but only the apply buff will go into the target. No matter who I target, the modify unit will still go onto the caster. And for the validator here, I will set this to 2 conditions, and I will go through what this does. I was not aware of this previously, but you can have a validator which will group up other validators. Previously, I used the logic and used multiple and parameters in order to create them everything the same way in this way, but this is really difficult to read. So I accidentally came across this, which will apply both of these. Target is in combat and target has not buff. And the target has not buff. For this one, I've set the logic parameter to equal to, and set this to false in order to make sure that this asks the question in order to make sure that the valid target are only units that does not have this respective buffer. For the core question is if the target has a buff from source, and the target being the search radius goes off and the valid targets being applied is set to, only the targets without a buff will be a valid target according to this validator. And target is in combat, entity is in combat. In Stormgate, to my understanding, being in combat is a state of being when either the unit has fired its weapon or when the unit receives damage, and this case being the target of the set. So the target condition that combines both of these means that only the units that are in target that has either received damage or has used its weapon or does not have the buff will be eligible targets. And that is the combined target condition. And for the search radius, I'll be setting the previously set condition, and I will be limiting target to 1, so that when it searches the area, it will, once it has found one target, the search radius is done. For demonstration purposes, I'm setting this to 20, and I will be removing enemies from the equation and self. This player and self. Player means that all of your units are valid targets, and self means that the caster of the caster yes of the search radius will be only be here. So I could hypothetically remove player, and this will exclude all the units except from the self, or I could have in this case, so that only the caster will not be caster and enemy will not be targeted. And then tags here, I can exclude, for instance, structure, entity unit structure, so that only units will be eligible target in the search radius. And let's see, the search location. This will be where the search radius will go off, so I want this to be in the center of the unit, and it will search out instead of accidentally searching for instance the unit here, and it will go in a search radius around it. That is why I'm setting it to entity and caster. And the target sort here, by default, without one of these parameters, without any target sort, it will start searching from the bottom left and work itself upwards to the top right, I do believe. But here I have the option to, for instance, distance closed. This means that it will start searching and go expanding outward and outward from itself until it finds eligible targets. Or it could have the unit with the highest amount of energy or lowest amount of hit point, for instance. But I will be applying random here, so that there is no logical target it will be found. It will start searching all of the units and at a random, and once it has found one target, it will be done. And next, for the persistent. The persistence effect location will be at the entity and the caster, so that it will go and applying the periodic. The Infernal Vitality. So when the effect location will be the caster, and it will continuously go off and searching in the center to make sure that the persistent and search radius will go off at the caster. And I will applying the flag channeling here. This means that in order for the persister to continue existing, it will have to be channeled, either by a weapon or by an ability which has also a flag channeling, so that if the unit receives a new order or is for instance stunned, then this will be cancelled. And going back to the periodic, I will be setting the count to -1. What -1 will do is that the persistent will continue indefinitely, or until it is cancelled in any way. And I'm setting the periodic duration to 1. This means that every 1 second, the effect of the periodic will be continuing to pulse. In this case, every 1 second, the unit will do a search radius and look for a new target. Well, the search radius has a limit to 1. This only applies to the search radius. Every second it will do the persistent will do a new search radius. And for the validator here, quickly, I will setting this to no energy. Quickly looking at the validator here. For this I will need a logic parameter and a greater than or equal to with a value of 10, where this will be asking the core question, the entity energy in the caster. This will be asking if the caster has has 10 or more energy. And if every second that the periodic goes off, it will ask if the caster has 10 or more energy. If the caster has 9 or less, then the validator then the persistent will be concluded. And I will apply a model here as well. The Venom Trap, this will be a graphical effect that will be played at the location of the persistent, which is this case is the unit. So you will have a green glowing effect around it. The Unreal Actor is what will cause the green glow effect that you will see. And I will apply no energy here as well. Seeing as the stage ability will be directly applied to the persistent and the validator is placed here, this effectively will operate as the staged abilities validator. So if the unit has 9 or less energy in this case, then I cannot cast the ability. And now to assemble the ability. See, where's the stage ability? Stage ability data. This is what, for most spells in the game, the stage ability data is what you will be using to create abilities. And for the first parameter, cast game effect, this is the effect that will be played when you try to use the ability. The Infernal Vitality, the persistent, and having the flag. I do not see having this two channeled, so that so when you cast this, the unit will channel this ability. If it receives a new order, then the channeling, or if it's stunned, then the channeling will be concluded, and the persistent as a result will also be concluded. And for the target actor, currently with the base target actor, this is when you activate the ability, then you will have to manually target a new target, but I will be setting this to instant target actor. When you click the hotkey or manually click it in the command card, then this will be instantly be casted, which you will be able to more easily see when I use it in the game. So the base target actor is for manually targeting, and instant is for when you don't want to target. You want for instance, the persistent to immediately be used on the caster in this case. And targeting type, I will be using this specifically on a unit to make sure that it does not, by some freak accidentally target the ground and creating indefinite persistent on the map. And the unreal component here. This will be the unit itself's animation. Different units has, for instance, casters in some cases has a casting an ability or a channel ability, for instance, and this will be determined here what it looks like. And that will be spell. AC ability states C. This will be the Hexen's channeled animation. Other spells, it will be he will briefly cast, the Hexen will briefly cast his arms in the air and then will go down, but spell C in this case, it will, so long as he is channeling the spell, then he will keep waving his hands in the air. And now lastly, to apply this to the unit. In the editor, it retains the Hexen's old name Hag. You can tell from the entity properties here. here what the editor's name, what its name is in the editor. And now I'm applying to the ability list so that oops, I already had it previously. I'll be showcasing to show what it looks like. This is how now the unit will be able to actually cast the ability. It does not necessarily have to be in the command list command card. If it was an auto-casted ability, then all it would need is to be in the ability list, and it will still be able to cast it even if you can't see it. And giving it a new... I forgot to delete this previously. And here is where it will be placed in the command card. This will be the ability itself and the button that I previously created. And the button here will have what the ability will look like in the command card, what's the name and the description of it. And I will quickly showcase something as well. Currently the editor, you would have to open the CSV in order to store the names and the tooltip of abilities name and tooltips of buffs and buttons. But if you do not do so, then it will simply be. Then this will be reset, and you will return to no string ID found when you reset the program. So currently, do not bother putting much effort into this in the editor, at the very least not in the PTR. And row and slot here. Intuitively, you would think that the top row with the attack move, stop, and patrol would be the row 1, but it is not the case. For instance, here the hold position and stop data, hold position and stop, for instance, both of these are placed in the row 2, which will be in the top, and row 1 in this case will be the bottom row. So if you want to replace in the top row, you will be using the row 2, but if you want to have where abilities usually are placed, you will be keeping it in a row 1. And now let's go on and test the ability. And now, as I cast the ability, it will immediately be casted once I activate it, and nobody are affected because they are not eligible target yet. Now you can see these with the blue bars, they currently have the buff, which will increase their statistics. And now once the unit has reached having less than 10 energy, it will be cancelled by itself. Now let's cast it again, and now I cannot cast it because, well, it shows the wrong message, but I cannot cast it because I don't have enough energy. And now for Fire Strength. This will be a somewhat simple spell in that I will try to instantly buff 4 nearby entities. Now for the core buff here, which will affect the unit, I will have the visual effect spicy buff. This will be, I will primarily using it to make it simpler to see which targets are buffed or not. And having a duration of 10. And having the flag show progress, so that to make it easier to see which targets has recently been buffed. And the icon. Focused hatred to This will be the buff that this will be the icon you will see when selecting the unit, and it has the buff and interface, and a simple modifying effect. Attack damage percentage bonus. This will increase the unit's damage value, or decrease it if you have a negative value by a percentage value. And for the recently buffed, the only purpose this will serve is to effectively flag the unit and avoid, for instance, randomly targeting the same unit 2 or 3 times with one cast instead of refreshing the effect on 4 targets. And apply buff unbuffed. And for the apply buff for the core buff. And I will have this having a rejuvenation visual effect. And the reason why I have an refresh and unbuffed is because I will explain later why I have an refresh and unbuffed here. And done. And I apply refresh here. This will essentially be the same, with the only distinction being having a different visual effect. In order to make it easier to see which one has been cast, to make it clearer when I test it in practice. And for the button, this will be for the command card ability, the same as the buffs icon. And now for the set unbuffed, this will be for when the unbuffed, when looking for, I will be using this to look for units that does not have the core buff. Set this to entity and target, yes. So that this will be when the search radius goes off, it will be looking for. And for the last recently buffed, this will be for the to apply the temporary blocker for when I try to find new targets. In order to apply the recently buffed, which will effectively stop me from accidentally casting it multiple times on the same target. I'll apply to the recently buffed now. And for the button here will serve as the abilities icon in the command card. And the unbuffed, this will be the set on the unbuffed that will be looking for targets that does not have the core buff yet. And make sure it goes to entity so that it does not accidentally target the ground and target nothing. And having 2 effects. Having 2 apply buffs here and unvalidator. This will serve to make sure that only targets that does not have the core buff will be eligible targets. And a brief interlude here. I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out why things didn't function properly, until I realized that I looked through the list and I placed the wrong target has not buff here. I played Infernal Vitality instead of Fiery Strength, which is what I'm currently making. And now let's see how that is made. And the content will be on logic with an equal to, which asks if the target has target has a buff from source, the target being the switch target when I search the area, the buff being the core buff that modifies the unit and any unit, and setting it to false so that the question will it will only look for targets that only targets that does not have the core buff will be eligible targets. Next up will be the refresh buff. This is what will be used in the search radius research when all targets in the area has a buff, that being the core buff here. And I'll set this to entity to make sure that it does not target the ground, targeting nothing, and 2 effects. Good, so that the one with the special particle effect will be played when I use this. And with the validator, recently buffed. And now let's look at the content of this. This will effectively be the same one, but instead of having looking for the core buff, it will be looking for the recent buff, meaning that it is okay to refresh the spell on targets that already have the buff, but not in the rapid succession. Meaning that it is okay to target the units that has the core buff, but not the ones that has the temporary blocker. And now for the search radius. First thing first, the unbuff, the set unbuffed, and I will be setting the max targets to 1 so that this search radius only will apply, will stop when it has found 1 target. The persistent will repeat this 4 times, but I will explain why when I come to that point. And setting the value to 10. Setting the filter to avoid enemies and neutrons. And again a tag if I wanted to. If I wanted to avoid structures which usually does not have any weapons, I can exclude this so it does not accidentally buff them. And the search location, entity and caster, so that the search radius will go center around the caster and look around it instead of having the target here, for instance, and looking around that instead. And the target sort, I will set this to random as well, so that it does not have any certain pattern to what the target the search radius will look for first. And for this, I will quickly detour the switch. I will be using a switch in order to connect these together, in order to use this to determine if I have found a 4, 3, 2 or 1, or if all the targets has been buffed in the area. This will be used to find out, or will be used to determine which of the persistence will be used. Now, first thing first, the persistent 4. This will be used if there are 4 or more eligible targets that has not been buffed in around the caster. First thing first, setting this to entity caster to again make sure that it will center and look around the caster, and the periodic to a count of 4, and an effect, the search unbuffed, so that the persistent will 4 times will launch the look for unbuffed targets. And before I go on with the refresher here, this again is the same as the unbuffed, except it has a different visual effect. Now for the number 3 and what will and things and here things will be a little bit more complicated. I'll set this again to entity and caster to make sure that it is centered around the caster. Again, a count of 4. But now I will have set 4 durations and 4 effects. And I will let all of these be set to default except from this one, which I will set to 0.5. And these first will be, whoops, not that one. All of these will be, the first 3 will be the unbuffed. And the last one will be the refresh search radius. Also, I want to clarify something previously I misspoke here. The refresh here will also inherit the set validator, which will filter out recently targeted entities but be allowed to target the units that has been core buff, in contrast to the unbuffed that has filters out units that has been buffed but with the core buff but does not have the recently buffed blocker. Okay, now back here. Now, why I have 3 of them here but the last one to be refresh buff. This will be the effect when only 3 entities in the vicinity has not been buffed by the core buff, but one of them has it. So, this will be counting. This will be 3 times the first 3 of the 4 counts will launched unbuffed to filter out, to actively search for unbuffed targets, and the last one here will be, the refresher will be spending the last count to again buff on unit that already has the buff but could still be refresh its duration. And for the number 2 here, when 2 units in the area has been when the search radius only finds 2 targets that has not been buffed, it will be largely the same. And I will be setting the periodic to 4. But this time I will only set 3 durations and 3 effects. And I will be setting again the last one to 0.5. And the first 2 to search radius unbuffed. Now what will happen? It has an count of 4 but only has 3 effects. What will happen then is that the duration method and effect method will come into place, which by default is set to repeat last. When the first 3 counts has been done and the 0.5 and the refresh has been buffed, the search radius refresh buff has been launched. The persistent will launch these two again one more time. This could be set to a loop, by which point when the third one is launched and it will count on 4, it will go back to the top, or with a random then, by which the duration and if the effect method had been random, then these would have gone off in a random order. And now for the last one, this will be launched if only one target in the vicinity does not have the buff. Again, I'm setting this to 4, and only 2 durations and 2 buffs. Now when this goes off, it will launch one time. It will launch the unbuffed to find the last remaining target that does not have the core buff, and after that it will repeat 3 times. It will be refreshing. It will refresh the buff on 3 targets, so long as the repeat last is set to its default settings. And for the last one, persistent all buffed. This will again be mostly the same, except this one I will only have refresh. So that if there are no targets in the vicinity that does not have the buff, everyone has the core buff, then this will 5 times launch the, 4 times it will refresh the buff on existing units. And now for the Validator 1 to watch the magic here. There. You will notice something here. Count number of entities in area that passes Validator. Previously I have used target has buff from source, but it could be me that I'm stupid or something and did something wrong, but when I tried it I could not make this work, in that I wanted to search for a limited number, the Validator 1 being finding only one target that does not have the core buff. So that is why I have this instead. Counting the number of entities that in the area that passes the Validator, that being does not have the buff, around the position of entity, that being the caster. So this will count the caster itself and the other entities in an area of radius 10 around the caster. If 10 of these entities does not pass them, if only one target passes this Validator in that it does not have the buff, being the count of 1, then this will be true, and it will be the same for the other ones as well, only having counted 2 and count to 3. The only difference being the number 4 here, which would have a greater than or equal to. Seeing as the spell is only intended to buff 4 targets, I add this so that if it counts 4 or more that does not have the buff, then this will be true. Now let's set up the switch effect. I will have 4 cases and open all of them. How a switch works is that it has cases with which I can set the validators to and on default action. And I'm just going to set this up quickly. Now that I've set this up, let me explain. When I apply the switch to the ability and it tries to use the switch effect, then it will go through the cases first, and in the order that has been set here from 0 and downwards. If the validator here, if it finds 4 or more targets that does not have the buff, then the switch will go to launch the persistent, and everything else in this condition, everything else in the switch will be ignored. If this fails, and it has less than 4, if the validators does not match, it goes on to the next one in the order. If there are specifically 3 targets according to the validator that does not have the buff, it will instead, the switch will use the persistent 3, and it will ignore the rest. The same with the 2 and the 2 and the 1. If all of these fails, however, the option is to have a default action, which will be which in this case will be the persistent that assumes that all targets in the vicinity has been buffed. So that is how one switch works. And now to assemble the spell. Again, this is an staged ability data. And staged ability data here. This is what you will be using to create most spells. And I'm applying the switch here, so that the switch and the cases will be determining what persistent will be launched. And I will use the preempt here. Where is it? Preempt. This will be if the army is moving, for instance, then if I cast this without preempt enabled, then it will cast the spell and stop in its tracks. But with preempt, it will simply send the order first into the queue and continue when the spell is casted. That is what preempt will do. And I will be setting this to target actor from base target to instant. And the Unreal component to spell A. Spellcast A. The previous spell I used on and spell C, in which case the Hexen's spell C will be a channeling effect, but spell A, it will simply be, the unit will simply cast its hands in the air quickly with its instant animation spell, instant animation, and then continue as usual. So that is the unit itself's animation is tied to this. Now I want to quickly apply it to the unit and let's test it out. Oops, I had already set this to the unit when testing it. Yes, I already had it. Now let's test it out. And now to test out the ability. This should now buff 4 targets. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 3, 4 new. 4, 3, 4. Good. It works as intended so far. And now let's look how this works. Here there are 8 targets total. They will target 4 at a time, and now let's see what happens when I cast it the 3rd time. Quickly waiting for the blocker to expire, and now 2, 3, 4. It refreshed its target, refreshed the buff 4 times. Now let's see here. Here there are 7 total. And now it will cast on 3 targets and once refreshing. As you can see, it refreshed once. Here there are 6 total. Now it will refresh twice. And for the last one, it will refresh 3 times. Good. And there you have it. Now this is working properly. Now let's give me a moment to check something. Initially, when I was making this spell and figuring out how things worked, I had a small problem. Which it turns out that I simply had, when I made things earlier and testing it, I had simply made something wrong. Because earlier on I needed small delay when casting the refresher, the buff refresher. When the search goes when the search went on for unbuffed, then things went smoothly and it found new targets. But initially, when I made this, I had a problem with that. I thought that when it was searching for units that already had the buff, I thought that things went too quickly, so that the spell would cast the persistent and the set so fast that the spell would not notice that the new target had the recently buffed blocker on that prevented me from accidentally refreshing the buff twice on the same target when more targets were eligible. But I was wrong. So then let's see what things looks like with an 0 cast time on everything. With a 0 delay between everything, sorry. And let's see, recently buffed, I'm setting this to 0.1. So to be able to more freely cast it. Now let's test it. And now let's test it out. It's casted all targets perfectly fine when starting initially, and now the refresher works perfectly, unlike when I initially tested it. At the very least, from what I can see, it looks like that it casted perfectly fine on 4 separate targets, that including itself from time to time. Also, I want to showcase what I forgot. The instant actor. If I, without an instant actor, if I had casted a spell now, the unit would stop if I had casted it. But seeing as I have preempt in the staged abilities flags, the unit will be able to move as it casts it without interrupting its spell. For the next spell, Bolster Champion, I will have a channeled spell which will reduce damage taken by the target and causing it to regenerate life over time, and the spell will be cancelled if the unit moves too far from the caster or the caster runs out of energy. First thing first, the buff. I will be setting the effect to invigorate to make it easier to see, and a duration of -1, meaning that the buff will have a duration of forever, but it can still be removed by other means. And having the icon that's showcased in the interface, because I could not, using Power Leap, because I could not think of anything else on the top of my head when making this, and it's not important anyway, seeing as it's just for showcasing. And 2 modifier effects. Health regeneration scaled. This will give on flat value healing regeneration to the entity, and this to armor scaled additive, which will give on flat amount of additional value to the target of armor. And now quickly to apply effect to give a means to attach it to a target. And the button, I will be similarly setting it to Power Leap. And a remove buff, because I need a way to remove it, seeing 2, seeing as it lasts forever otherwise. And modify vitals. This will be the caster, yes, and a -2 per tick, so that, and as I attach this to the persistent, it will gradually drain the caster's energy. First thing first. The effect finisher, this will be running on the, this will be performed on the target when either the persistent has run out of its periodic counts or if it is prematurely cancelled, in contrast to effect expire, which is dependent on the periodic counter run out. And when the persistent first starts, it will apply the buff of the spell. And I'm keeping this on the target, seeing as the persistent will be sitting on the persistent will be focused on the target, so that apply buff and remove buff will be applied to the target, but the modify vitals will be run on the caster, seeing as that is how it is set on the, seeing as it is set to the caster here. And I'm setting periodic to -1 in order to make the persistent in theory run forever or until cancelled by other means. And every 0.2 seconds. Every 0.2 seconds, the persistent will remove 2 energy from the caster. And I'll be combinator. I will explain what that does when it gets there. And there was something I forgot here. Yes, channeling. So that this will need to be channeled by a weapon or ability. And a validator here as well. I don't remember if I explained this previously, but the validator here on the persistent itself, this will determine if I can apply the persistent on the target to begin with, but the periodics validator, this will be every tick, every count, every periodic count, then it will first run the validator here, and if this does not add up, then the persistent will be destroyed. First thing first, no energy. This will be asking if the caster has more or greater, an equal to or greater value than 2 of energy. And distance, this will be the distance between 2 points, the target and the caster, and it will be an equal to or less than value of 15, meaning that if the target goes at more than a distance of 15 away from the target, then this validator will fail. And I'm combining both of them in an all validators met, which you saw in the persistent. And now to quickly assemble the spell and let's test it. And here I'll set this to channel to make sure that this ability will have to be channeled in order for the caster for it to work. And here is a fun alternative, reactive. When this is enabled, then other units will be able to right-click on the caster in order to make the caster cast this spell on the unit, or at the very least activate the spell. You will be able to see when we get into the game and test it. And I'm setting the max range to 15 to add up with the max range of the spell. And now I'm removing enemies and self, so I cannot accidentally cast it on myself. Or for that sake make enemies potentially be able to. Well, I'm not sure if enemies can use reactive or not. I don't think so. And targeting type unit, so there's no freak accident of accidentally targeting the ground instead of unit itself. And on the Astromancer, the default Unreal component animation channel work will be the unit's channeling animation. And I'll say that. And I'll quickly apply to the unit when I find it. Animancer, not Astromancer, sorry. And now let's test the spell. And I forgot, I think I accidentally did not add something here. Heal beam, because I wanted a beam between the caster and the target to make it more visually appealing. And now to test it if it works properly. Good. Seems to be working so far. And now for the fancy part. When I right click on this unit, even though I've selected the Archangel, the Animancer will cast its spell on me. This is what the reactive effect will do, which is kind of neat. Nice. Now for the video's last spell, Virulent Plague. What this will do is that it will apply a buff onto a target that deals damage over time, and every 3 seconds it will spread onto a new target, while staying on the same target. This lasting for 8 seconds, and this will spread and spread and spread as time goes on. And it's gonna be interesting. Let's get started. First thing first, the buff 18. This will be the start, and I'm setting this to the buff 18, which will be the core buff that the spell revolves around. And I'll be setting the Validator to immunity. And I will explain later what this do. Now for the buff aspect, I'll be setting the visual to the detonation time above. This will be almost turning these units into green circles, but it will be serving the purpose of making it easier to see things. And having each stage lasting only 3 seconds, I will be copying these to 18, 15, 12, 9 and 6, but first I will be setting things up so I do not have to set everything up 5 or 6 times over. Now next thing, it will be the apply buff immunity. Once the unit has received the buff, it will be receiving the immunity aspect. And now for something interesting. Override source. What this will do is that the unit with the buff will be traced back as the source for search area or persistent effects, for instance, that can be traced back to this buff, so this can be operating in interesting ways. With the target effects, you have a target, source, and caster. Caster will always be the the absolute ground zero, but source can be changed all the time with the who that receives this. The one that receives this buff will be the new source for subsequent search areas and so on. And setting the icon to Everlasting Plague. And I will have one modifier with health regeneration. And I will be setting this to -4. What this will do is that the buff will deal damage over time. And if the unit reaches 0, then this negative regeneration will kill the unit. And I'll be setting to expire here as well. Virulent Plague to search 15. When the 3-second duration of the buff expires, when the 3 seconds are done and it is concluded, then the buff will do a search area, and this will be spreading the plague further. The effect final will be launched regardless when the buff is dispelled or the unit dies, or the duration is over. But this expire. This means that the spell will have to last. The buff will have to last this full duration. And to buff immunity, this will be a duration of 4. And just so I can see just so I can track it, so that I can see it in the interface. And apply buff immunity. Now for what this immunity does. It is a simple logic equal to that asks if the target has the immunity buff with set of false, meaning that the search radius when the search radius goes off, only targets that does not have the immunity will be eligible targets. And set this to 15. The set 15, and a max target of 1, being only able to spread to one target at a time, with a radius of 10 around itself. And here is something. Usually I would be setting this to the enemy and neutral, but since the override source has been applied to the buff, then the enemy will become the new source. Me as the player, without source override, then the search area would be going back to player 1 unit. But since it has an source override, it will now be fine. It will now be when I have set player enabled, and it will be searching for its own team's units, and it will be not including itself the original unit with the buff. And I will be setting this the target source to closest. I could make it go. I could make a total chaos by having random units be affected, but you'll be seeing how quickly this spreads when it spreads to the closest units. And I'll be setting this to entity and source, so that I'm certain that it will be tracking around the unit with the buff. Now for the set 15, I'll be setting this to entity and target, and this will apply 2 effects. Apply buff 15 and apply buff 15 self. The apply buff 15, this is intended to spread it to new targets, but the the 15 self, this is intended to keep refreshing the effectively refreshing the plague onto the keeping the plague on going on the original targets and circumventing the validator that we're placing here. So when this search radius goes off, when the search radius goes off, the only targets that are immune will be are not immune will be eligible targets, but when I get to the self here, you will see why this effectively circumvents the validator. And now, let's see, everything has been set up here, so I will make a couple of copies of this. And now I have 5 of them. Instead of having to set everything up manually, everything has been copied over. I will have to manually set the new search areas up, but I've saved a whole lot of work by doing it this way. And now to the apply buff 15. And this will be set to this target. The set 15 looks for search radiuses eligible targets effectively by this validator's immunity. And now for the buff 15, which will be applying the buff as well, but this will go back to the source. When the effect set goes off, it will go onto the target of the search area, but since the target of this self here will be source, it will effectively circumvent the validator and keep the play going. And there's something here before I forget it as well. The effect no target found. If there are no eligible targets around the targets, then in theory the search area would fail and it will not launch the set that has apply 15. So this would mean that the plague on a target would end prematurely. So if back to the search area, if there are no eligible targets, then you can use a redundancy effect that will be launched, which in this case will be applying the apply buff to self. This will be a redundancy way to keep the play going. And now I'm going to make a couple of copies of these to finish the spell. Now the apply buffs has been set, and now back to the set effect cell. And now that it is largely been complete, the only thing is to remove this. When there are 6 seconds remaining, I do not want it to spread any further. Then I'll be happy with how long it has lasted. I could hypothetically set it to 3 seconds, or you know what, I could set it to anything I want, seeing as I am modding the game, but I decided to end it at 6 seconds. And let's see. I'll be setting it to 6 seconds in order to make sure that it adds up with the last remaining buff duration, which should be 6 seconds, I'm sorry. Now for the second last step, setting up the button here. Okay, I already done that, and Now for the assemble the spell and the staged ability. So I think this will apply buff 18. That will be the original cause of the trouble here. Setting to 20 for demonstration purposes. Making sure that this can only target enemies or neutral. And target type to unit, so I do not waste it by targeting on the ground. And settings to spell A. And quickly setting it up to the spellcaster, and let's test it out. And now let's test out the spell. And now to test it out, and I dearly hope that I assembled the spell properly. Yes, now it spreads. And I did something wrong. Give me a moment. And here I found the plague. Set 15. This is correct. All of the subsequent, however, are not correct. The search area is thus a search area. It is supposed to be applying a set, and same with the subsequent ones. Now things should hopefully be correct. Now let's test it again. And now to see if I finally done it correctly. Now it spreads. And now it continues spreading. Oh. Good. And that is how the plague spreads. Let's try it again. If I hypothetically were to cast it again now, then this would not jump on and override the secondary plague would not go on to override the plague, seeing the existing plague, seeing as they have the immunity here. Now, for instance, these will not be. This will be limited to, if I cast it the 9 seconds, for instance, later, then this could potentially be spreading over again. But if I spread it in a rapid spread it to 2 almost immediately, then they will not have any chance of overlapping each other. And that was it for this video. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and hopefully learned something that you can use if you plan to use the editor. Again, if you have something you want me to try and make or explain, then feel free to comment so in the comment section. Stay intact and have a nice day.